You wake up tired. You check your phone before your feet touch the floor. You have a job to get to, emails to answer, a to-do list that never actually ends. This is what a normal day looks like for you. But for almost the entire history of your species, a normal day looked nothing like this at all. For over 95% of human existence, there was no alarm clock, no job, no to-do list, and yet your ancestors survived, ate well, and had time left over. That sounds impossible? It isn't.
In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee traveled to the Kalahari Desert to live among the hoansi San, a hunter-gatherer people whose way of life had remained largely unchanged for thousands of years. He expected to find people locked in a constant, desperate struggle for survival. He expected exhaustion, hunger, a life consumed entirely by the search for food. He found something else. Lee tracked how the hoansi spent their time, hour by hour, day by day. What he discovered stunned him. Adults spent an average of around 15 hours a week gathering and hunting food. Not 15 hours a day, 15 hours a week. The rest of their time went to resting, socializing, storytelling, childcare, and craft work. By comparison, the average person in an industrialized nation today works far more than that just to keep a roof over their head.
How is that possible? How did people with no supermarkets, no refrigeration, and no modern tools have more free time than you do right now? The answer lies in what early humans actually needed to survive, and it was far less than you'd think. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins coined a term for this in the 1960s. He called early hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff, affluent because they wanted less. Their needs were simple. Their environment provided enough, and once those needs were met, there was nothing left to chase. No mortgage, no stock portfolio, no endless upgrade cycle telling them they needed a newer version of what they already had. Your ancestors weren't working themselves to exhaustion trying to accumulate wealth. Wealth, in the way you think of it, didn't exist yet. There was no reason to gather more food than you could eat before it spoiled. There was no reason to build a bigger shelter than you needed. Enough was enough. And once you had it, the rest of the day was yours. So what did they do with that time? They talked. A lot. Researcher and anthropologist James Suzman, who spent years living among and studying the hoansi, found that a huge portion of their day was spent simply sitting together, talking, joking, arguing, and telling stories. Not idle chatter. This was social maintenance. It was how disputes got settled, how knowledge got passed down, how the group stayed bonded tightly enough to survive together. Think about that for a second. In a world without books, without written language, without any way to save information except inside another person's memory, conversation wasn't a break from the important work. Conversation was the important work. Every story about where the water dried up last year, every joke about a bad hunt, every piece of advice about which plants were poisonous, all of it was survival information, passed down purely through talking. You still do this, by the way. You just don't notice it. Every time you vent to a friend about your day, every time you gossip about a coworker, every time you tell a story at dinner, you're doing exactly what your ancestors did around a fire 60,000 years ago. Your brain didn't evolve for spreadsheets. It evolved for stories. They also played. Children in hunter-gatherer societies spent enormous amounts of time in unstructured play, mimicking adults, practicing skills, testing boundaries, and just being kids. Adults played too. Games, music, dancing. None of it was frivolous. Play is how a developing brain rehearses the skills it will need for real situations later, without the real-world risk. And they rested. Genuinely rested. Not the kind of rest where you're scrolling a screen while your brain quietly panics about tomorrow. Real, unstructured, guilt-free rest. There was no concept of being unproductive because productivity, in the modern sense, hadn't been invented yet. There was only enough or not enough. And most days, for most groups, in most environments, there was enough. Now, this wasn't paradise. Life was still dangerous. Infant mortality was brutally high. A bad drought or a bad season could still mean real hardship, even starvation. Nobody is arguing you should trade dental care and modern medicine for a life in the Kalahari. But the myth that early humans spent every waking hour in a grim, non-stop fight for survival simply isn't supported by the evidence. That myth says more about how you were raised to think about work than it does about your ancestors.
So when did all of that change? When did humans start working so much?
The shift happened with agriculture.
Around 12,000 years ago, humans began settling down, planting crops, and domesticating animals. And here's the part that surprises most people. Agriculture didn't make life easier. In many ways, it made it harder. Farming required far more labor than foraging. Skeletal evidence from early agricultural societies shows signs of harder physical strain, worse nutrition, and shorter stature compared to the hunter-gatherers who came before them. You traded a shorter work week for a food source you could store and control. It was a trade that let populations grow explosively, but it wasn't necessarily a trade that made any single person's daily life better.
Once you could store surplus grain, you could also lose it, steal it, or fight over it. Once some people had more stored food than others, hierarchy appeared. Ownership appeared. And with ownership came something that never really existed before: the need to keep working indefinitely to protect and grow what you had. The 15-hour work week of your foraging ancestors slowly became something else entirely. That something else is the direct ancestor of the life you're living right now. The alarm clock, the commute, the inbox that refills the second you empty it. None of it is natural in the sense of being hardwired into you by millions of years of evolution. It's a few thousand years old, at most, a blink in evolutionary terms.
Here's the part that should actually change how you see your own exhaustion. Your brain, your body, your instincts, they were all shaped by a world where 15 hours of work was normal, and the rest of the day belonged to rest, talk, and play. You are running ancient hardware inside a world that demands industrial-era output. No wonder so many people feel constantly behind. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're a hunter-gatherer brain trying to survive inside a system it was never built for. That doesn't mean you can walk away from your job tomorrow and forage in a forest. The world has changed too much for that, and honestly, so have you. But it does mean the exhaustion you feel isn't some personal failure. It's a mismatch, thousands of years in the making, between what your mind expects and what your calendar demands.
So, the next time you feel guilty for taking a break, remember Richard Lee's data from the Kalahari. Remember that rest wasn't a reward your ancestors earned after their work was done. Rest was simply part of the day, the same as eating, the same as talking, the same as sleeping under the stars. You wake up tired and you check your phone before your feet touch the floor. But somewhere underneath all of that noise is a much older rhythm, one built for 15 hours of effort and the rest of the day simply spent being alive.
Thank you for watching. For more educational and informative videos, please like and subscribe to my channel, Doodle2D.